Take you to the broadcast of It's Time with Reverend Nathaniel W. Martin. Here's Reverend Martin.
Thank you, Dr. Blackwell. And let me say Hotep Habaragani to my Africana Studies people. And let me say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, but certainly never good night and never ever goodbye, because I've always found goodbyes traumatizing. I said I, personal, have found goodbyes traumatizing. My name is the Reverend Nathaniel Wayne Martin. I'm the pastor of the New Life Institutional Baptist Church here in the city of Los Angeles, and we are presently being hosted by our sister church, the Shiloh Missionary Christian Church, pastored by my good friend, the Reverend Dr. Della F. Hollines. And if you are in the area, we invite you to come and worship with us at any and all times. You know, they always say when the Baptists and the Charismatics get together, there's always going to be a shouting in the camp. And surely God has blessed the fellowship and the communion, and we prayerfully look forward, oh God, to his continued blessing. Keep us in your prayers. Thank you very much. The offering which you are viewing at this time is a social justice offering. Yes, a social justice. Amen. Offering, and it isn't. And the reason why is because we cannot serve God in a bubble or in a vacuum. You're going to have to be out here with me, and I'm going to have to be out here with you, and that sometimes puts us on the subway of life and on the highways and freeways of life, and in the, yes, the department stores and the places of business, and in the government of life. In every place where society meets, that's the only place where we can practice our Christianity in our way of viewing Christianity. Social justice strives for equity and rather than just fairness, because in this game of life, musical chairs may be fair, but it is certainly not equitable, because you got more people than you have chairs, and every time you lose a person, you take away another chair, so that there's always one less chair than there are people to go around, and nobody knows when the music is going to stop. And as it relates to our society, blacks against dealing with our white sisters and brothers, the game has always the status of blacks as opposed to white people. The game is structured to make the white man always win. So we cannot say we have a level playing ground, because there's no such thing, and we cannot say we have equality, because there's no such thing. And if we only go for fairness, that means we treat everybody the same. That certainly is not going to be right, because the healthier a person is, the more likely they will win at the game of musical chairs. And of course, as it applies across the spectrum of life, it becomes even more apparent that there is social inequality, racial disparities, and economic disparities that are going to make it hard for any society, any nation, especially a democratic nation, to say that it is fair and at the same time equitable. All right. On the matter of reparations, I'm a firm believer in reparations, because of the fact that I know that this nation owes a great debt to the descendants of the slaves who built this country, who built this land, who were kidnapped from their homeland and spirited across the dark bosom of the Atlantic and the European transatlantic slave trade, and began to be settled in the Caribbean islands, in Haiti, and ultimately in Cuba, and ultimately here on the United States shores. Remember, Florida was not conquered for a long time, and that was a Spanish stronghold, and so the slave trade was flourishing, and there was nothing equitable or fair about the way that the powers that be, the white powers that be, were treating the blacks in this country, because just as they attempted to exterminate the native population, the indigenous people that were here when the European arrived, so likewise they sought to exterminate and eradicate the memory and the intellect and the identity of the people brought over from Africa, so that they would not know who they were and where they came from. They would only know the white slave masters, and to a great extent they succeeded. So therefore the reparations part is vital. As we say, it is a inescapable concept. It's a principle rather, and you're not going to get on to equality until you have dealt with this economic component. Scripture says that if thy brother, an Hebrew man or an Hebrew woman, be sold unto thee, and serve thee 6 years, then in the 7th year thou shalt let him or her go out free from thee. And when thou sendest them out free from thee, thou shalt not let him or her go away empty, but thou shalt furnish them liberally out of thy flock, and out of thy floor, and out of thy winepress. Of that wherewith the Lord thy God hath blessed thee, thou shalt give unto them. This is my interpretation of the Deuteronomy 15th chapter in the King James Version of the Bible. All right? All right, so Zacchaeus was up a sycamore tree that he might see Jesus. Zacchaeus was a tax collector, and he kept as much as 10, if not more, % of everything he collected. So he had grown rich from off of the backs of his own people. But when he met Jesus, and Jesus told him, I must come down because I must come sup this day at thy house, with thee at thy house. And as he was entertaining Jesus and he was listening to Jesus, he told Jesus, said, now if I have defrauded any man, not that if, but because I know that I have defrauded people, I will give them back fourfold of all that I have taken away from them. That means he's going to try to make it right, which means he was willing to pay reparations to his own people whom he had exploited for the sake of the Roman government. Remember, the Roman government had a certain amount that they demanded that their tax collectors collect, and everything above that, the Roman government turned a blinded eye. So it may be that these tax collectors were getting over on Rome and getting over on their people. So, hey, talk about equity and fairness and equality. You have really, really opened up a can of worms, you see, because none of the people were financially equal to Zacchaeus, so there was no level playing field there. And these things one has to take into consideration when one is forming government policy that shall address the needs of people. It was unfortunate that Jordan Neely was on that train on that fateful day when a white man, a U.S. Marine, decided to snuff his life out, and then claimed on the in the aftermath that he didn't mean to kill him, I find that hard to believe, to rectify. Especially when he put the man in a chokehold. Everybody knows that you put a person in a chokehold to do what? Choke them to death. Choke them out. And so these are inequities, inequalities, lack of fairness are rampant in our culture. I feel that not only should Daniel Penny be held accountable, but the two white fellows that were on Jordan Neely's left arm and on Jordan Neely's right arm should likewise have been charged with first-degree murder, because they murdered him. They knew they were going to murder him, and they were complicit and helped Mr. Daniel Penny in his murder of Jordan Neely. And so not only Daniel Penny should be held to account, but the two white boys that assisted him. That's a conspiracy in my way of looking at it. Also, as we continue to look at the fact that the debt ceiling was raised, but look who got hurt. The needy, the people that were on SNAP, substance nutrition assistance to parents, I think is the way that program is laid out. But anyway, that program has been abridged because the GOP were able to extract from the President of the United States, who happened to be Joseph Robinette Biden. He didn't seem to be a good negotiator. He gave away the promise that he had made that the student debt would be forgiven. He had to give that away to satisfy the Republicans. And he gave away the, like I said, the Snapchat. And there was another program that benefits the poor. Everything that benefits the poor was cut, was put on the chopping block. And unfortunately, the President Biden went along with it in order to get the debt ceiling raised, because his imperative was the debt ceiling, but the people got trampled. You know, they always say when two elephants fight, the grass gets trampled. So we got trampled. We got trampled, and that just shows again, this is musical chairs, and if you don't have a seat at the table, you're on the table, actually on the menu. And which leads us to look at Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois' editorial or book or opinion, really, that he started writing in the crises way back there after the end of World War II. And I'm going to try to quote, if I don't make you go to sleep. Listen to what he's saying. Remember, in World War I, they fought in France. Who were they fighting? They were fighting Germany. What was Germany trying to do? Start a fascist government even then. So when Woodrow Wilson was able to lead America into the war, then this nation was still segregated, still divided along racial lines, much not as rigidly as it is today. Well, no, let's say it was more rigid than it is today. But you still have to watch yourself even today. But then it was virile, venal, violent. And so when the Negroes were overseas with the French, because General Pershing did not want them with his regular white army. You had the regular army, then you had the Negro colored troops, as they were called, with apologies to all of our Black Africana Studies folks. History is what history is, and we were not called black, we were called colored, Negro, and worse. and that was the condition. But the racial hostility was at its height, and when the colored troops were assigned to the white outfits, of course they were assigned as to be hewers of wood and drawers of water, and not to be ennobled by fighting. But of course, war, you start a war and you can't control this outcome. But the white supremacists from America were determined to uphold the racial hierarchy in Europe as it was exercised and observed here in the United States of America. So, in W.E.B. Du Bois' writings, he declares, he works his way up to this point where the top white officers were alleged that the number of rapes committed by Negro soldiers had reached epidemic proportion. That's Du Bois' word. And so Du Bois explained that the charge of rape was invented by the white South after Reconstruction to excuse their mob violence. All right. Today, the nasty and absolutely false charge to justify the outrageous treatment of Negroes by Americans in France. He quoted verbatim statements from the mayors of 21 French towns, all declaring that black troops comported themselves with dignity and posed no threat, sexual or otherwise, to the civilian population. So the question is asked, what was the real animus back of this wholesale accusation that there was an epidemic of rapes since the black troops, or colored troops, or Negro troops, as how you have them, had come into France? And the answer, according to William Du Bois, was that it was the fact that many Americans would rather have lost the war than to see a black soldier talking to a white woman. Now that was, I didn't make that up. I'm quoting what W.E.B. Du Bois, who was an anthropologist as well as a historian, as well as a sociologist, a very strict historical methodology, well researched. I believe he was our first anthropologist, sociologist at least, here in America, sociologist. And thank God for Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois. And they're still quoting from his writings, from his works, and from his unpublished work, which is now out, called The Wounded World, The Black Soldier and the Wounded World, in which Du Bois attempted to report to the nation and to the world what the Negro soldier endured and was subjected to by his own American countrymen over there in the war to make the world safe for democracy. All right. Like I said, you can't make this stuff up. When they came home at the end of the war ended maybe 1918 or 1919, and the soldiers began to come home to great fanfare, naturally in New York. But when the black soldiers were returning home and were trying to resume their normal lives, well, the Jim Crow sign was still up. The segregation sign was still up. The white water fountain and the colored water fountain, and the white bathroom and the colored bathroom, and the white cemetery and the colored cemetery. All of those things were still extant and virulent and viciously enforced because of the system of white supremacy. And just as an aside, we get misled by the racial label, because what we were really wrestling with was white supremacy, and what we are still wrestling with is this white supremacy. And white supremacy is most dangerous when it's invisible, and we can't use the word race in order to redress the inequities that we have suffered because of Supreme Court rulings that says that race cannot be a factor. But what was the major factor that held us down? Why, it was white supremacy. And so to limit it only to race says that both races were practicing supremacy, and it was not the case. What the case was that there were white supremacists over here, and then there was the black population over here that was always being attacked by this white supremacy racial hierarchy. Enough of that. And so when the Veterans Administration began to establish veterans hospitals, naturally with the tone of the country, you could not have black soldiers, Negro soldiers, colored soldiers in the same hospital with white soldiers, north or south. And so what they finally decided was that they would take so many acres, 100 acres down there in Tuskegee, Alabama, and put up a hospital just for Negroes. Mind you, all these other hospitals were for white folk. But they said, we're going to put a Negro hospital south of the Mason-Dixon line in Tuskegee, Alabama. And they built that hospital. And it was a fine establishment when it was built. And it was the dedication was on February 12, 1923, which is over 100 years ago today. February 12, 1923. We are now in June 2023, so you know it's over 100 years. But let us not digress. Let me stick to my point. Most disabled servicemen, black servicemen, suffered in silence rather than submit themselves to the subhuman treatment that they were subjected to by their white doctors and white nurses and white interns, because let's face it, the white folks did not want to deal with any black service people. All right, so the issue of whether it would be staffed by black physicians. Now remember, this was a black hospital established for black servicemen back south, 300,000 estimate of disabled black servicemen in the south. Remember, the white folks had all these other hospitals, mind you. All right, Walter Reed and all those others north of the Mason-Dixon line. This was the first hospital for black servicemen to attend to their wounds, to try to fulfill what Abraham Lincoln said, to comfort him who shall have borne the war, and for his widow and for his orphan. But the question was would this hospital, this Tuskegee, Alabama hospital, this Veterans Hospital, be run exclusively, would it be staffed by black physicians and nurses, or would it be run exclusively by whites? And the issue came to an explosive head. And Alabama white supremacists, ranging from the governor to the head of the state American Legion to local Tuskegee residents, insisted, mind you, they insisted that all white personnel run the hospital. Going back to my original point, it was a colored hospital. It was the only colored hospital. But because of white supremacy, because of what they considered the Negro problem, these folks said now it can only be run by white people. All right. Additionally, black control of a federal hospital with a monthly payroll of $65,000 represented a threat to the fundamental understanding that black Southerners must remain in a position of economic and political inferiority to whites. You can't make this stuff up, folks. The Veterans Bureau, concerned with maintaining the support of local whites, agreed and appointed an incorrigible racist named Colonel Robert H. Stanley as director. Okay, and Stanley stood firm that the hospital would exclude black doctors and nurses. The hospital crisis stood as a historical referendum on the government's treatment of black veterans and, by extension, the legitimacy of African Americans' sacrifice during the war. The war we're talking about is World War I. Remember, that was the war to make the world safe for democracy, according to Woodrow Wilson. Du Bois called these people the archpriest of racial separation in the United States of America. They were demanding that the physicians, surgeons, and officials in charge be white. The hospital opening with a full white staff of doctors and nurses with colored nursemaids for each white nurse in order to save the white nurse from coming in contact with colored patients. Like I said, you can't make this stuff up, folks. And what was more insulting, the contract for burying black people in the South, in Alabama, with this vicious racist, it was awarded to a white undertaker from Greenwood, South Carolina, before local black undertakers could submit a bid. All right, and W.B. Du Bois said, human hatred, meanness, and cupidity gone stark mad, separating races in hospitals and graveyards and fighting to put white men over a Negro hospital. Now, isn't that ironic? Isn't that a source of irony? And so when you consider that today the Ukrainians are attempting to force the South African nations to support them in their fight against Russia, even though the Russians supported South Africa in their fight against America and the South African apartheid. Remember, American was on the side of apartheid. Ronald Reagan said he was on law and order, and that's for if apartheid could maintain law and order, he was all for it. And as I wrap up here, remember Dick Cheney and his ilk, along with Ronald Reagan, had dubbed Nelson Mandela a war criminal, a terrorist, a war criminal. And when he got out of prison and became the president, then he did a victory tour. And they asked him, was he going to renounce Cuba? And he told them, Cuba supported us in our fight to gain our freedom, our independence. No, we're not going to turn our backs on our friend. And so the chickens at as Malcolm X said, are coming home to roost, folks. And so America is looking askance at the 54 African countries while they're not supporting America as it fights against Russia. Well, like he said, Russia helped us. We were fighting against you. Hallelujah. All right, as I wrap up, remember the dock workers are still on strike, striving to get a better chance at wages and a lifestyle for their families, leave something behind for their families. And as I always say, if you're working on a job and they don't want to pay you, take my advice and don't work for them. Thank you, Doc. We're out of here.